The hum of conversation filled the airbase conference room, a mix of clipped voices and casual laughter that seemed to carry an invisible boundary. At the long table, senior officers and seasoned pilots leaned over maps and mission briefs, their crisp uniforms lined with bars and ribbons. Screens glowed with tactical displays, but in the periphery of it all moved Anna Keller. Mid-30s, dark hair pinned in a simple knot, she balanced a tray of steaming cups. To them, she was background noise, a civilian aide assigned to support functions. She slipped between chairs quietly, setting cups down without breaking the rhythm of their planning. No one noticed the way her hands trembled slightly under the weight of the tray. No one asked her name. She was just the coffee girl, a woman who fetched, carried, and disappeared. Snatches of whispering cut through the drone of the briefing. A young lieutenant leaned toward his seatmate, voice pitched low but not low enough. Bet she's been here forever. Look at that jacket. Picked it up from surplus or maybe a dumpster behind one. His companion snickered, eyes flicking dismissively toward her back. The jacket did stand out olive drab canvas, seams frayed, collar missing a button. On a base where everything gleamed with newness and polish, it looked like a relic that had wandered in by accident. Anna didn't flinch. She had heard worse. She kept her focus steady, setting down another cup, her steps measured, her face unreadable. To most in the room, she was invisible, something less than the machines they flew, less than the papers they pushed across the table. But not to everyone. At the far end of the room, Colonel Eric Voss sat slightly apart from the others, his square shoulders leaned back in his chair, a hand resting loosely on a folder. Silver threaded through his cropped hair, and his uniform bore the quiet weight of decades in the air. He had the stillness of a man who had seen too much and survived. And in that stillness, something shifted. His gaze fixed not on the coffee in front of him, not on the chatter around the table, but on her sleeve. The room, in its careless laughter, had missed it. The patch faded, half-torn, stitched into the jacket's arm. A circular emblem dulled with time. A serpent coiled around a blade, wings unfurled, the faint outline of 3 letters above it. O.S.R. Voss's breath caught, though no one heard it. His hand, steady in the cockpit under fire, tightened imperceptibly on the folder before him. He blinked once, as if clearing his eyes, but the patch remained, faded, real. Anna Keller placed the last cup on the table, turned slightly, and for a heartbeat the emblem was fully visible under the fluorescent light. The laughter of the younger pilots carried on, careless, echoing against the sterile walls, but Eric Voss wasn't laughing. His stare had hardened, locked on her sleeve as if he had just seen a ghost walk into the room. The chatter dulled in his ears, the mission slides blurred. All he could see was that patch. That impossible patch. His jaw set. The others might not know. They might never understand. But he did. And in that instant, Anna Keller was no longer just the coffee girl. She was something else entirely. The laughter hadn't fully died down when Eric Voss's voice cut through the briefing like a blade. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't barked like an order. It was sharper than either of those, low, cold, and undeniable. "Where did you get that patch?" The words dropped into the air with a weight that silenced everything else. Chairs creaked as men shifted, uncertain. One pilot's chuckle trailed into a cough that sounded too loud. Pages stopped turning. The buzzing projector hummed against the sudden stillness. Anna froze mid-step. The empty tray balanced against her hip. For a moment, she didn't know if she had truly heard him, if those words had really been directed at her. Slowly, she turned her head. The colonel's eyes were on her, fixed, unblinking, as though she were the only figure in the room. The young lieutenant who had made the joke about her jacket let out a nervous laugh, as if to break the tension. "Sir, she?" Voss didn't even glance at him. His stare never left the faded threads on Anna's sleeve. The emblem, once bright, now worn to near nothingness, seemed to burn under his gaze. A winged serpent, tail curled around the hilt of a sword, wings spread in mid-strike. Above it, 3 faint letters. OSR. Anna shifted slightly, as if bracing herself against a wind. She didn't look at the others. She didn't explain. She simply raised her chin, meeting Voss's stare with a quiet steadiness. He exhaled slowly, a sound almost like disbelief, almost like reverence. You were with Operation Silent Raptor? The name wasn't said often. For many in the room, it was only a ghost story, a classified whisper half forgotten in training manuals. But hearing it spoken aloud made the air feel different, heavier. A stunned hush rippled through the room. The younger pilots exchanged wide-eyed glances, each silently asking the other if they'd just heard what they thought they had. Silent Raptor. The name alone carried shadows, covert missions, deep infiltrations, whispered rumors of operatives who never came back. Most of the room had been children when those stories circulated. None had ever expected to hear it spoken here, let alone connected to the woman who had just set down their coffee. Anna didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it either. Her silence was its own answer. The way she stood still, unflinching, her eyes never wavering, said more than words could have. Voss leaned back slightly, though his expression didn't soften. He wasn't looking at a civilian aide anymore. He wasn't looking at someone invisible. He was staring at a fragment of history that shouldn't exist, standing there in a worn jacket with a forgotten patch. The young lieutenant who had mocked her jacket sank lower into his chair, his smirk gone, shame rising hot on his face. No one laughed now, no one whispered. The briefing, the maps, the glowing screens, all of it seemed meaningless in the presence of the revelation that had just entered the room. Anna Keller, the woman they had dismissed as the coffee girl, was suddenly something else entirely, something none of them knew how to face. The silence in the briefing room pressed heavier than any order ever could. Every set of eyes shifted between Colonel Voss and Anna, the tension so taut that even the projector's quiet hum seemed intrusive. Anna stood with the tray still tucked against her hip, her gaze steady, her breath caught somewhere between defiance and resignation. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't sharp or defensive. It was quiet, almost hesitant, as though every word was being pulled from a place she had long ago locked away. "We went in without backup," she began. The words hung strangely in the air, foreign from her lips, like she had forgotten the sound of telling anyone. It was supposed to be a drop, coordinates only. 3 days, in and out, but nothing went as planned. The young pilots leaned forward unconsciously, caught in the undertow of her voice. Her hands brushed the frayed edge of the patch as she went on. I crossed the line alone, no one to cover me. Just an old radio strapped to my back and orders to keep moving no matter what. The towns looked normal enough at a distance, but they weren't. Every street corner had eyes, every door had ears. I carried messages others couldn't risk. They told me I was invisible. She gave a humorless laugh, a sound brittle as broken glass. Turns out they were right. Invisible when I went in, invisible when I came out. Her voice faltered just a moment before settling again. They caught me on the 12th night, hauled me into a camp that didn't officially exist. I remember the smell of the cages, oil and iron and rot. They didn't call us by names. Names were currency. You traded a name for a crust of bread, for a bucket of water, for a chance to breathe without someone's boot on your ribs. I didn't trade mine. I held it until my tongue bled. Someone shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared interrupt. They thought I'd broken. They thought I'd vanished like the others. And maybe I did, for a while. When they finally pulled me out, months later, the record said I was dead, officially lost. Convenient. She smoothed the sleeve of the jacket, her fingers resting on the patch. This is all that remembers me now. The room was still, the weight of her words settling like dust on stone. Colonel Voss pushed his chair back and stood, but not to loom over her. He moved with deliberate steps until he was directly across from her. He lowered himself into the chair opposite her, shoulders squared, eyes never leaving hers. The rank on his chest meant nothing in that moment. He wasn't an officer sitting across from a civilian aide. He was a soldier sitting before a monument. "They told us no one made it out," he said softly. His voice, once sharp enough to cut steel, trembled at the edges now. Anna's eyes held his, and for the first time she allowed herself the smallest of smiles, bitter and weary. "We did," she whispered. "They just buried us instead." The following morning the conference room felt entirely different. The fluorescent lights hummed as always. The projector glowed with the usual maps and data, but the air held a reverence that hadn't been there before. When the door opened, no one looked past her or through her. No one snickered or whispered. Instead, a full row of pilots stood rigidly at attention, their uniforms crisp, their boots polished to mirrors. Their eyes followed her as she stepped inside, not with suspicion or dismissal this time, but with the kind of respect reserved for legends. Anna paused, the faintest crease forming at her brow as she took in the sight. She was used to being invisible, to sliding into a room unnoticed, to slipping out again with no trace left behind. But now, every gaze seemed to hold her steady, as though the very walls recognized her. At the center of the row stood the young lieutenant who had mocked her jacket days earlier. His posture was stiff, his jaw tight as though he had rehearsed this moment in silence. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped forward, clutching a folded flag against his chest. In his other hand, a bouquet of flowers fresh, bright, incongruous against the sterile walls of the base shook faintly as he held them out to her. His eyes flicked up to meet hers only for a heartbeat before darting away again, shame carved plainly into his features. "We didn't know," he said, his voice unsteady but clear. "We're sorry." The silence that followed was deeper than any apology. Anna reached out, not for the flowers, but to brush her fingers against the edge of the flag. The young pilot exhaled, as though a burden had been lifted, and stepped back into the line, his chin higher now, though his guilt still clung to him. Across the far wall, something new caught Anna's gaze. A framed photograph had been mounted since the night before. It was of a younger woman, her own face from decades past, sharper, unlined by years, eyes steady and fierce beneath the shadow of a helmet. She remembered the day that picture had been taken, though she hadn't thought of it in years. Around it, a plaque gleamed under the harsh lights. Anna Keller, Operation Silent Raptor. Service without record. Valor beyond recognition. She stared at it for a long moment, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and release. The records that had once erased her now bore her name. The silence that had buried her now spoke. Her hand moved instinctively to the sleeve of her old jacket, fingertips grazing the faded patch that had outlasted everything else. The stitches were frayed, the colors dulled, but it had endured. Just as she had. A faint smile curved across her lips, fragile yet unshaken. Some heroes left medals in display cases, some filled books with their names and deeds. Others carried only silence, wearing their history not on ribbons but in scars, in memory, in a patch barely clinging to worn fabric. Anna Keller had left both. And finally, the silence broke.